today we're going to talk about how we can use number lines to show how percents relate to fractions and decimals. We're going to start with 25%. We know from our studies that 25% can be converted to a fraction, which would be 25 out of 100. We also know that we can convert that to a decimal, which would be 0.25. What we're going to do now is represent these numbers on a number line. So the first number line I'm going to draw involves fractions. So I have 0 on the left, and my whole number would be 100 out of 100. Before I plot this number, I think in my head, what would halfway be? So if 0 is on the left and 100 out of 100 is on the right, what would the middle be? Well, half would be 50 out of 100. So then I know that I have to plot 25 out of 100 onto the number line. So it's about right here, 25 out of 100. Then I move on and I plot the decimal. So if I have 0 over here, I have 1.0 over here. Again, I think, what would half be? Half would be 0.5. So then I think, okay, well, about halfway between that would be 0.25. Last but not least, we're going to plot the percentage. So we have 0% over here, 100% on the right, and halfway would be 50%, and we want to put on 25%. So what our number lines show is how 25 out of 100, 0.25, and 25% are related. We can also do the same thing starting with a decimal. So here we have 0.15. Well, we know that as a fraction, that would be 15 out of 100, and as a decimal, as a percentage, we already have the decimal, as a percentage, it would be 15%. So again, we draw our number lines, 0 and 100 out of 100. This time, I'm going to mark where the halfway point is, but I'm not actually going to write anything down. And then I think, okay, so if the blue mark is halfway, 15 out of 100 would be closer to 0 than it would to halfway. So I'm going to put it about right here. I do the same thing with the decimal, 0 and 1.0. I think about where half would be, and then I plot 0.15. Again, last but not least, we do it with percentages, and 100% over here. Halfway would be about there, and so I plot 15% about right there. And again, our number lines show how 15 out of 100, 0.15, and 15% are related. You can also use number lines to show how numbers are related to each other. So we have 2 out of 5 and 7 out of 20. So let's start with the 2/5. Right now, 2/5 isn't easy to put into a decimal or a percent. But if we get a denominator of 100, it makes it a bit easier for us. So to get from 5 to 100, we have to times by 20. What you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator, and 2 times 20 would give us 40. So now we have a fraction out of 100, 40 100ths. We know that that as a decimal is 0.4, and as a percent is 40%. We do the same thing for 7 out of 20. We need to get a denominator out of 100, and to do that, we multiply the top and the bottom by 5. We get 35 out of 100. So that's the same as 0.35 and 35%. Last but not least, we have to put them on our number lines. So we'll start with 0 and 100 out of 100. Again, I'm going to mark halfway, but that's more for me to figure out where these things go on a number line. So if that's 50 out of 100, then I'm going to say 40 out of 100 is about right there. And 35 out of 100 would be about right there. Then we move on to our decimals. So 0 and 1.0. Again, I think about half. So 0.4 would be about there, and 0.35 about there. Last, we go to our percent number line. So we have 0 and 100%. Same thing, I will mark halfway. And then I have 40% and 35%. And these number lines allow us to compare 35 100ths, 40th 100ths, 0.35, 0.4, and 35%, and 40%. And hopefully this video will help you understand how to relate fractions, decimals, and percents.